"Margaret, I need to tell you something," Lisa whispered, her voice barely audible over the clinking of silverware and soft background music, and Margaret felt a chill run down her spine even before the words fully formed. The dining room was warm, the chandelier casting a gentle glow over the polished oak table, the aroma of roasted turkey and mashed potatoes filling the air, and yet the moment froze around her like frost on a windowpane. She looked at her son James, who sat across the table, fingers drumming lightly on his glass, pretending not to notice the tension that had suddenly tightened the room. Margaret's eyes flicked to Lisa, reading the subtle tremor in her hand as it rested on the folded napkin, the quiet pull of her lips, the hesitation that betrayed the secret she was about to spill. She forced a smile, small and controlled, her heart thudding quietly against her ribs, but her face composed, calm. Every instinct told her to react, to recoil, to demand clarity, but she had learned patience through decades of careful observation and quiet endurance. The memory of her late husband's soft voice reassuring her in moments of uncertainty surfaced, the echo of his laughter mingling with the clatter of plates and murmurs of polite conversation around them. She remembered the countless evenings spent preparing meals, setting tables for birthdays, holidays, ordinary Tuesdays, and each gesture of care and attention that had once meant the world to her family. And now, in this carefully curated scene of normalcy, the whisper broke that illusion, a quiet accusation, a revelation wrapped in betrayal. Margaret took a measured breath, letting the warmth of the room touch her without softening her resolve, letting the familiar scent of sage from the stuffing ground her in reality. She noticed the subtle shift in James's posture, the micro-expression that hinted at his awareness of what was being said, yet his lips remained sealed, offering no protection, no denial. Margaret's gaze swept the table again, noting the gleam of polished silver, the patterned china set meticulously for the evening, and the way the candlesticks caught the light, reflecting back fragments of their own expectations and failures. The hurried phone calls, the unexplained absences, the casual deflections in conversation that now seemed significant in hindsight. Her lips pressed together, a quiet line of steel, and she nodded almost imperceptibly, acknowledging the moment without surrendering to it. The dinner continued, voices around them blending into a gentle hum, but Margaret's attention was sharp, acute, every movement, every glance catalogued and assessed. She felt the weight of history, of countless shared meals, of holidays and milestones, pressing down lightly on her shoulders, yet strengthening her resolve. The whisper had not broken her. It had awakened a deliberate calm, a focused awareness that had been tempered through years of navigating family dynamics, reading intentions behind smiles, and measuring truth beneath politeness. Margaret's hand rested lightly on her glass, a subtle anchor, and she let the evening unfold, each bite, each sip, a quiet assertion of her presence, her dignity, and her readiness to confront what lay beneath the surface when the time came. The gentle laughter of James's friends mingled with the clatter of cutlery, a stark contrast to the storm simmering quietly in the space between mother, son, and daughter-in-law, and Margaret held herself upright, serene and calculating, fully aware that the events of this night would ripple through the fabric of their family, a turning point already taking shape even in its silence. Margaret excused herself quietly from the table, letting the soft murmur of conversation follow her as she moved toward the living room, the polished hardwood floor beneath her feet reflecting the warm glow of the chandelier overhead. She poured herself a glass of water, noticing the faint condensation beading along the side of the crystal glass, and took a slow sip, allowing the cool liquid to steady her racing thoughts. The air in the room was tinged with the scent of roasted vegetables and fresh bread, a comforting reminder of the effort she had put into preparing the evening, yet it also served as a backdrop to the subtle tension that had taken hold. She sank into the high-backed armchair near the window, the fabric soft against her fingers, and let her mind drift back over the past few weeks, examining small inconsistencies, subtle gestures, moments of avoidance, and unexplained phone calls that now seemed to form a pattern she could no longer ignore. Her gaze settled on the framed photographs lining the mantel. James, as a boy, smiling in front of the Christmas tree, Lisa laughing at the garden party the previous summer, family vacations captured in the blur of sunshine and waves. Each image, once innocent and heartwarming, now seemed layered with nuance and unspoken intentions, a narrative of events that had gone unnoticed until tonight. Margaret recalled the way Lisa had handled the dinner preparations in recent months, always volunteering, always polite, yet there was a precision to her movements, a subtle calculation in her manner that had been invisible until viewed through the lens of this newfound awareness. Margaret's thoughts returned to James, the quiet shift in his attention during the evening, the slight tension in his voice when discussing work or upcoming plans, the way he avoided meeting her gaze directly. She traced her fingers along the edge of the armrest, grounding herself in the tactile reality of the room, and allowed the calm to seep into her muscles, a counterbalance to the swirl of suspicion forming in her mind. Outside, the faint hum of the evening traffic carried a rhythm that contrasted with the stillness inside, a reminder of the wider world beyond this household and the small sphere of control she had maintained over her life and routines. Margaret's breathing slowed, each inhale deliberate, each exhale a release, and she began to catalog the details she had observed. The slight tension in Lisa's posture, the hurried glances at her phone, the careful choice of words when discussing the family schedule. None of it was conclusive alone, yet together it painted a story she was now determined to understand fully. She reminded herself that patience had been her ally for decades, and that observation, quiet and precise, often revealed truths more clearly than confrontation. She sipped her water again, letting the glass rest in her hands, and felt a sense of readiness building, a calm readiness to navigate the unfolding situation with measured awareness. The light from the window reflected off the glass surface of the coffee table, scattering in subtle patterns across the rug, and Margaret took note of it, absorbing the small, ordinary details to anchor herself. Her mind wandered briefly to the dinner table, the conversations continuing. Unaware of the scrutiny she now brought to every interaction, every word, every glance. She allowed herself a faint, controlled smile, the kind that conveyed nothing to the casual observer but held the weight of insight, understanding, and preparation. Each movement in the house, each small sound, became part of a larger picture she was quietly assembling, a mosaic of behaviors and intentions that would guide her next steps. Margaret's gaze lingered on the doorframe leading back to the dining area, knowing that the evening was far from over, and that the subtle power of attention, the accumulation of details, and the silent presence she maintained would shape the outcome in ways that mere words could never achieve. In the quiet, she felt a resolve solidifying, a clear, composed readiness to observe, to act when necessary, and to let the unfolding events reveal themselves in their own time, all while maintaining her dignity, her composure, and the careful balance between patience and anticipation. Margaret remained seated in the living room, her hands folded neatly on her lap, feeling the quiet hum of the household around her as she listened to the faint laughter and clinking of glasses from the dining area. The contrast between the warm, celebratory sounds and the sudden stillness that had settled over her own thoughts made her acutely aware of every small detail. The way the light reflected off the polished wooden floor, the subtle shift in the air currents as someone passed by, the distant hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. She recalled how earlier that week she had noticed James spending more time away from the house, the way he seemed distracted during phone calls, and how Lisa had offered to help with errands that seemed unnecessary, each act perfectly timed, each word carefully chosen. Margaret allowed herself to reflect on her own calm, the way she had maintained composure at the table despite the unsettling revelation, noting that control over one's reaction often revealed more about character than a rash display of emotion. She traced her eyes over the sofa cushions, remembering family movie nights spent here, the smell of buttered popcorn mingling with the aroma of coffee from the kitchen, and she realized how easily everyday routines could conceal subtle tensions. Margaret considered the significance of the whispers, the small inflection in Lisa's voice that had carried a weight far greater than the words alone. She thought about the many family dinners, holidays, and celebrations where similar undercurrents might have existed unnoticed, and she wondered how often she had missed such cues, trusting the apparent normalcy of the moments. Her mind methodically cataloged details, The positioning of chairs, the order in which dishes were served, the timing of casual remarks, gestures that at first seemed innocuous but now hinted at an agenda. She sipped her water slowly, letting the coolness steady her, allowing the calm surface to mask the analytical energies stirring beneath. Margaret's attention returned to the photographs lining the walls, portraits of birthdays, graduations, summer barbecues, and she observed them not as mere snapshots of memory, but as markers of opportunity, moments when choices had been made that shaped relationships subtly but decisively. Every smile, every handshake, every shared glance now seemed layered with potential significance, and Margaret understood that observation was as powerful a tool as confrontation, if not more so. The ambient sounds of the home continued, a clock ticking in the hallway, the soft rustle of a curtain as a breeze slipped through the window, and each became part of the fabric of her reflection, a rhythm she could use to measure the unfolding of events. Margaret felt a quiet resolve solidifying within her, a readiness to gather information patiently, to recognize patterns, and to discern intentions with clarity. The house seemed to breathe around her, ordinary in appearance yet charged with subtle energy, and she remained fully present, poised to translate her observations into understanding. In this calm, Margaret embraced a sense of quiet authority, knowing that insight, patience, and attentive awareness would provide the means to navigate the situation with precision, that the small, deliberate observations she made now would guide her next actions with the confidence that came from experience, composure, and a deeply rooted understanding of human behavior. Margaret sat back in the armchair, letting the subtle creak of the leather support the weight of her thoughts as the conversation in the dining room carried on without interruption. She observed the soft glow of the chandelier reflecting off the polished surfaces, the faint sparkle of crystal glasses, and the careful arrangement of silverware that had been set with precision hours earlier. Her mind wandered to the events leading up to this evening, recalling moments over the past few weeks when James had appeared distracted, answering calls quickly and stepping away under the guise of urgent work, and how Lisa had always been conveniently present, offering assistance with tasks that seemed ordinary at first glance but now appeared calculated. Margaret reflected on the small gestures that had once seemed benign, a polite smile, a casual question about the grocery list, a suggestion to help organize the family schedule, each action now hinting at an underlying motive. She traced her eyes over the familiar room, the warm tones of the walls, the patterned rug under her feet, the mantel lined with photographs of birthdays, holidays, and vacations, and each image told a story that she had once viewed through the lens of trust and affection, but now interpreted with caution and clarity. She remembered the conversations she had overheard, snippets of laughter and discussion that, in retrospect, contained subtle clues she had previously ignored, cues of intentions that had been carefully masked. Margaret allowed herself to breathe deeply, focusing on the cadence of the room, the soft clink of dishes, the murmur of voices, the gentle breeze fluttering the curtains, and she cataloged these details meticulously, using the ordinary rhythm of the household as a framework to assess the extraordinary situation. Each observation was a piece of the puzzle, helping her build a clearer understanding of the dynamics at play. She noticed the interplay of light and shadow across the room, the way it highlighted the contours of furniture, the gleam on the silverware, and the reflective surfaces that created small, distorted echoes of the interactions taking place. Margaret's resolve strengthened as she sat quietly, her posture poised and attentive, aware that her calm composure was a form of silent control, a way to absorb information without revealing her depth of understanding to those around her. She reflected on past family gatherings, recalling how she had learned to read the subtleties of behavior, the unspoken language that conveyed more than words could, and she applied that experience now, interpreting each glance, gesture, and movement with precision. The evening continued around her, yet Margaret remained centered, her senses attuned to every detail, every inflection, every minute signal that might reveal more of the truth she was carefully piecing together. She understood that patience, observation, and measured attention were her strongest tools, and she embraced them fully, allowing herself to quietly prepare for the steps she would take once the full picture had been revealed, maintaining dignity, clarity, and a sense of controlled authority over the unfolding family dynamics. Margaret remained seated, her back straight against the armchair, feeling the quiet hum of the house settle around her like a soft blanket. The dining room, now distant, held traces of the dinner that had unfolded moments earlier, the scent of roasted turkey and fresh herbs lingering faintly in the air. Her gaze wandered to the kitchen, where the silverware had been neatly stacked and the remaining dishes waiting to be cleared, evidence of the careful preparation she had undertaken for the evening. She thought about the subtle interactions she had observed, the glances exchanged between James and Lisa, the slight hesitations in their speech, and the small, almost imperceptible gestures that had hinted at intentions she had yet to fully understand. Margaret's mind catalogued each detail, the timing of remarks, the order in which items had been served, the way Lisa had positioned herself near James without appearing intrusive, and the careful way she had managed every movement. She reflected on past gatherings, remembering similar patterns she had overlooked, moments when actions had seemed innocent but in hindsight carried hidden meaning. Margaret allowed herself a slow breath, focusing on the rhythm of the household, the quiet ticking of the clock in the hallway, the soft rustle of curtains as the evening breeze moved through the window, and the low murmur of voices from the television left on in another room. Each element became a reference point, anchoring her in the present and sharpening her awareness. She reached for a small notebook she kept nearby, one where she often jotted observations and reminders, and ran her fingers lightly over its cover, contemplating the notes she would make after the evening concluded. Margaret considered the relationships she had cultivated over the years, the trust she had extended, and the patience she had shown, realizing that these qualities had provided her with insight and perspective now more valuable than any overt confrontation. She sipped water from the crystal glass, noting the way light refracted through it, casting subtle reflections across the table and onto the floor, and she felt a sense of clarity emerging from the calm. The house itself seemed to breathe around her, ordinary in appearance but charged with the weight of unspoken intentions and quiet strategies. Margaret acknowledged the need for careful timing, recognizing that every observation, every small action she took, would contribute to a broader understanding of the events at play. She imagined the next steps she might take, the conversations she would initiate, and the careful approach she would maintain to ensure that clarity and truth emerged without unnecessary disruption. Each thought reinforced her resolve, a steady awareness of her own presence, her capacity for perception, and the deliberate control she maintained over her responses. The evening, with its familiar smells, soft lighting, and ordinary rhythms, became a canvas upon which Margaret could map the subtleties of human behavior, preparing herself for the unfolding of consequences with measured attention and quiet confidence, fully aware that her composed observation would guide the course of what was yet to come. Margaret remained in the living room, letting the soft, muted glow of the evening settle around her as she continued to observe the subtle currents of the household. The faint aroma of dinner still lingered, a reminder of the effort and care she had invested in preparing the meal, each dish meticulously crafted, each utensil carefully positioned. She watched the flicker of shadows across the walls as the chandelier swayed slightly in the gentle breeze coming through the open window, and each movement seemed to underscore the quiet tension she had been measuring throughout the evening. Her mind traced the interactions she had witnessed, analyzing the pauses, the phrasing of remarks, the controlled expressions, and the almost imperceptible gestures, each one offering a hint at underlying intentions. Margaret allowed herself a calm assessment, cataloging details in a methodical way, the way Lisa had arranged the seating, the timing of comments, the subtle shifts in James's focus, and the careful placement of objects on the table that seemed to guide attention and influence perception without anyone speaking openly about it. She reflected on previous family gatherings, recalling how similar patterns had gone unnoticed, moments when polite conversation and ordinary movements had masked tensions, and she recognized the importance of patience and observation over immediate reaction. Margaret sipped her water, feeling the cool clarity of each swallow, and let her gaze drift to the photographs on the mantel, tracing faces frozen in time, remembering their expressions, the way each one had interacted with her, with James, and with Lisa, and she saw patterns now that had been invisible before. Every interaction, every carefully chosen word and gesture, became part of a larger puzzle she was assembling silently, constructing a clear map of relationships, intentions, and potential outcomes. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the clock, and the soft creak of the floorboards underfoot combined into a rhythm that Margaret used to measure the household's movements, a guide to anticipate the next actions without being drawn into overt confrontation. She reminded herself that restraint and careful observation were the tools that had served her best throughout decades of family life. That clarity came not from immediate engagement, but from absorbing details and interpreting them with patience and insight. The evening shadows stretched long across the carpet, and Margaret felt a sense of readiness settling into her bones, a quiet confidence that came from knowing she could navigate the unfolding situation with composure and foresight. Each passing moment reinforced her awareness of subtle cues, and she allowed herself a controlled smile, an acknowledgement of her own perceptiveness, knowing that the careful attention she maintained now would provide her with the advantage to act decisively when the time was right, all while maintaining dignity, calm, and a measured presence within the household. Margaret stayed motionless in the armchair, the subtle creak of the leather beneath her serving as the only indication of her presence in the room. The sounds from the dining area continued, a soft background of chatter, the occasional laughter, and the faint scrape of chairs against the polished hardwood floor, yet she felt separated from it, an observer attuned to nuances rather than participating in them. Her eyes followed the gentle sway of the chandelier above, the way its light scattered across the walls and ceiling, casting fleeting shadows that seemed to mirror the intricate patterns of tension she had been tracing in her mind. Margaret reflected on the past year, the small shifts she had noticed in James's behavior, the way he seemed to avoid certain topics, the brief moments when Lisa's smile carried an edge of calculation, all of which had seemed inconsequential at the time, but now resonated with meaning. She let her gaze fall on the mantel, where framed photographs depicted family gatherings, vacations, and celebrations, each image now layered with interpretation. The placement of people, the expressions, the positioning of hands, all small indicators of the dynamics she was now observing with precision. Margaret's hands rested lightly on the armrests, her posture composed, as she catalogued every detail, the precise timing of statements, the pauses, the body language that suggested unspoken intentions, and she found herself constructing a mental map of the relationships and behaviors around her, connecting points she had previously overlooked. She considered the flow of the evening, the way plates had been passed, the subtle cues in conversation, and how each element fit into a broader narrative that was slowly revealing itself. Her breathing was steady, each inhale and exhale a means of centering herself while allowing her mind to scan the room methodically, noting the smallest deviations in tone, glance, and gesture. Margaret allowed herself to appreciate the quiet beauty of the room, the polished surfaces, the soft patterns of light, the arrangement of furniture, and recognized how ordinary details often concealed extraordinary significance. She recalled the quiet lessons of patience, observation, and measured restraint she had learned over decades of family life, recognizing that true insight often came from attention to subtlety rather than confrontation. Each tick of the clock, each minor shift in the environment, each inflection in a voice became data she collected silently, shaping her understanding and preparing her for the eventual moment when knowledge would guide her action. Margaret felt a calm anticipation settle over her, a readiness to continue observing, connecting, and interpreting until she had the clarity she needed. The evening stretched on with a rhythm she could follow and anticipate, and she remained fully present, her senses finely attuned to every detail, maintaining dignity, composure, and an acute awareness that patience and observation would ultimately provide her the understanding and leverage necessary to navigate the intricate dynamics of her family. Margaret leaned back in her chair, the soft evening light filtering through the half-open blinds, casting linear shadows across the polished hardwood floor that seemed to stretch toward the corners of the room, and she allowed herself a moment of stillness, feeling the rhythm of the household continue beyond her awareness, yet intimately connected to her own observation. The subtle murmur of voices from the dining area, the distant clatter of silverware being collected and stacked, the occasional rustle of fabric as someone passed through the corridor. All of it formed a backdrop that Margaret absorbed with meticulous attention, noting the slight shifts in posture, the nuanced expressions, and the cadence of conversation that carried more meaning than the words alone. Her mind retraced the sequence of events she had observed throughout the evening. The timing of remarks, the careful positioning of hands, the slight hesitations before speaking, the glances exchanged between James and Lisa, all of which were now threads woven into a larger pattern she could interpret with clarity. Margaret considered the ordinary objects around her, the gleam of crystal glasses catching the fading light, the carefully arranged place settings still awaiting collection, the polished surfaces reflecting fragments of activity, each element a marker she could read with the patience and experience of years. She reflected on her own responses, the deliberate calm she maintained, the quiet authority conveyed by a composed posture and measured attention, recognizing that observation and restraint often revealed more than immediate confrontation. Her gaze drifted to the mantel, where photographs of past holidays, birthdays, and family events lined a shelf, each image a frozen moment now imbued with insight, illustrating behavioral patterns she had cataloged and learned to interpret over time. Margaret allowed herself a slow sip of water, the cool liquid grounding her while her thoughts mapped connections and implications, constructing a mental framework of understanding that extended beyond the superficial interactions of the evening. She felt the weight of experience, the accumulated awareness of decades spent navigating family dynamics, guiding her interpretation of each glance, each phrase, each gesture. The quiet hum of the refrigerator, the soft ticking of the hallway clock, the faint creak of floorboards under shifting feet became part of a rhythm she used to measure tension, anticipate movement, and discern intention, all while maintaining her composure and dignity. Margaret recognized that the unfolding of the evening was not merely a sequence of ordinary moments, but a landscape of human behavior, subtle and intricate, requiring patience, attentiveness, and strategic perception. She let herself absorb the calm, the gentle light, the ordinary details transformed by awareness into a matrix of insight, and she felt a quiet readiness, a poised confidence that each observation and careful calculation would inform her next steps. In the stillness, Margaret found clarity, a composed understanding of her surroundings and the interactions within them, knowing that patience and perceptive attention would ultimately provide her with the foresight to navigate the evolving dynamics of her family with precision, dignity, and unwavering control. Margaret rose slowly from the armchair, the quiet creak of the leather signaling her movement as she walked toward the large bay window that overlooked the backyard. The evening sky painted in soft shades of pink and orange, the last light of day filtering through the blinds and casting long, linear shadows across the floor. She paused, her hand resting lightly on the window frame, and inhaled the cool air drifting through the slightly open sash, letting the scent of freshly cut grass and autumn leaves fill her senses, grounding her in the moment while her mind continued to trace the events of the evening. She reflected on the details she had observed, the small gestures, the timing of statements, the glances exchanged between James and Lisa, and how each nuance contributed to a larger understanding of the household dynamics that she had been silently decoding for hours. Margaret considered the rhythm of the dinner, the order in which dishes were served, the subtle inflections in conversation, and the deliberate positioning of family members around the table, recognizing that each element was part of a carefully constructed scene that had allowed hidden intentions to remain concealed until now. She ran her fingers along the smooth surface of the windowsill, feeling the coolness beneath her fingertips, and used it as an anchor to organize her thoughts, noting connections, potential motives, and patterns in behavior that had emerged through careful observation. Her eyes scanned the yard, the familiar shapes of trees and garden beds now framing a quiet canvas where she could imagine future conversations, the measured approach she would take to gather clarity, and the way she would address the unfolding situation with precision and dignity. Margaret allowed herself to acknowledge the calm sense of control she had cultivated over the evening, the ability to absorb, interpret, and process information without immediate reaction, and she recognized that patience had provided her with insight deeper than any rash confrontation could have. The subtle creaks of the floorboards, the faint hum of the air conditioning, the distant voices carrying through the house, all became part of a tapestry of observation that Margaret used to anticipate the next moves, to measure intentions, and to remain fully aware of the underlying currents shaping the family interactions. She reflected on decades of family gatherings, the lessons learned from watching, listening, and understanding behavior, and applied that wisdom now to maintain her composure, gathering knowledge silently while preparing for the right moment to act. Margaret felt the evening stretching on around her, ordinary in appearance but charged with potential, and she embraced the clarity, insight, and readiness that came from her attentive observation. The calm she held was deliberate, a quiet power built from patience, awareness, and a steady, discerning mind, and she remained poised at the window, letting the subtle light and ordinary rhythms of the house reinforce her focus, knowing that each moment of stillness contributed to the understanding, preparation, and ultimate navigation of the intricate family dynamics she was determined to address with care, precision, and measured confidence.